But I will say this about the rest of the defense. I mean, the secondary, that secondary last year, I know they didn't. Let's not go after last year. How about that? Because, last year, the injuries, that's people are going to say that and be like, well, they didn't have it. Okay, 2 years ago, the secondary has not been very good. At least corner, we'll say corner has not been very good. They've been okay. Terrion Arnold struggled, obviously, last year. And, again, last year, he wasn't in a good position. You know what I mean? Like, they had no players. Everyone's hurt. It is what it is, but we saw Terrion Arnold in week 1 struggle. And that was his first game. And that's really the only sample size you got to see that in like the Tampa Bay game, I guess. But you didn't really get to see him at the end of the year with everyone healthy. But you have Ennis Rakestraw, who you drafted in the second round. I always mention first, second round picks are more premium. First round, obviously premium, but second round, still guys are drafted. Cooper DeJean is drafted, guys like that. You still expect those guys to be able to produce. So Ennis Rakestraw is still there. You brought in DJ Reed to replace Carlton Davis. And we'll see. I mean, maybe they draft a corner late. I would never rule that out, I guess. So you look at this corner room, because their safety. The safeties are always going to be solid. I mean, you have Kirby and Brian. Those guys are as solid as they come. Understandable. But do you think people are sleeping a little bit on this secondary? And I'm getting including corners, because we know the safeties are good, but we're throwing the corners in there too next season. Like, how far of a jump do you think they can take? And we're not talking 20th in the NFL in passing yards allowed. We're talking significantly better. And Amik, sorry, did not mention Amik.
Amik, yeah, don't leave Amik out. That's a big part of it, actually.
That's on me, Amik.
When I broke it down over here.
So where are you guys at with the secondary, and whether or not it can maybe shock some people next year?
Can I could go here first, because I have a thought process earlier today about the secondary that made me think about kind of, hey, around the NFL, where do these guys rank? Can we do a hypothetical?
Of course.
And I know hypothetical, you could do it in a negative way, like, oh, guys get hurt, guys play their worst. I want to do a hypothetical, don't do too often, on the opposite side. What happens if we go into next season, boys, and Terrion Arnold takes a step forward as we think he is, right? Like, what if Terrion, like, what he's supposed to do is kind of take a massive step from year 1 to year 2, especially as a rookie in the NFL. Let's say Terrion does that. Amik Robertson. This was like really, he started in Vegas, but they weren't a good football team. It wasn't like a established defense. This last year was his first year kind of in a legit established defense on a good football team in the NFL, to where he was a legit, like, I would say, starter on a good football team, correct? Mm-hmm. And when you look at that, at the end of the season, I would think, like, when Amik got moved to the outside, whether he was outside or not, like, even at the nickel, the man was a menace. He was elite. But when he got to move to nickel, like, that confidence grew even more. If you go into next year, boys, and DJ Reed is DJ Reed that we know of, where let's say it's the lateral move from Carlton Davis, where that's like your Carlton Davis, Terrion Arnold takes the step that you're like, okay, that's what we needed out of him. We needed him to take that rookie step. And then Amik is the Amik in the second half of the year, to where he just was unstoppable. His confidence was at a different level. He was talking. He was a leader. And then you have the best safety duel in the secondary. Do like, maybe again, maybe this is me over the last couple of days drinking the blue Kool-Aid. That's a pretty good secondary, though, boys. Like, that's like hey, this secondary can make some noise in the NFL. Like, you're talking about like a top 10 secondary going out there. And obviously the big caveat is if Terrion Arnold takes that step. But if he does that, like, I think it's all leaning on that. And if Terrion takes that step, boys, like, am I that crazy for thinking this secondary is going to take a step forward, especially in the NFC North with the weapons that you're going to have to go against? Klotz, I saw you broke down yesterday the quarterbacks you have to go against. Like, that's exactly what you need. If obviously we talk about the pass rush, but like, what you need is like that secondary to step up against all these different teams on the road. If they take a step forward with Brian Branch and Kirby, like, they're only going to get better. If Terrion takes his step and you have DJ Reed and Amik at their levels that they play, that's where you're almost looking at the advantage. Like, you think Hutch and them are the advantage, like, that secondary almost turns into that because of it. Like, we talked, Klotz, I think me and you talked about it a year or two ago with Brian Branch and Kirby. we were comparing them to, I think it was like the Seahawks secondary safety room a while back with Richard Sherman. Like that, it starts to turn into that, especially if you get the corners added to it. So, am I crazy for that, boys? Maybe I am. Maybe I'm not. I don't know.
Go ahead, Lucas.
I think there's a strong conversation, Booner, where I think Terrion Arnold, I put it like this. I think DJ Reed's probably top 20 corner in the NFL. So you have a top 20 corner. I think Amik Robertson probably top 35. I'm not expecting Terrion Arnold to become a top 15 corner because just off the top of my head, again, in new order, I put some down while you're talking about Pat Surtain, Sauce Gardner, Trent McDuffie, Jalen Johnson, AJ Terrell, Devin Witherspoon, Carlton Davis, J.C. Horn, Christian Gonzalez, Quinyon Mitchell, Tre'Davious Ward. My point is Terrion Arnold's not going to turn into a top 15 corner next year, but he doesn't need to. I think when you look at this secondary, especially the fact they're most likely going to add another safety in the draft. If they haven't done it yet through free agency, maybe they sign a Quandre Diggs late in the season. That's fine with me. I think that's just as fine as taking a guy in the middle of the draft at the safety spot. But when you look at this secondary, it could be outside of, like you said, outside of Aiden Hutchinson will be the strength of this defense. When you look at what made the Lions so good last year, because they couldn't get to the quarterback, what they were good at, especially Kirby Joseph, was creating turnovers. And I think year 2 of Terrion Arnold, DJ Reed kind of finding a new fresh city. He's going to be the leader of that cornerback room. And I think he needed that because he's been kind of living in the shadow of Sauce Gardner. So for him to be able to kind of gain some confidence with Amik Robertson, 2 guys that are 5'9", going to be laying some boom and creating some turnovers. Terrion taking that next step where he finally is able to make play on the ball and the receiver. And then you got 2 all-pro caliber safeties in the back end. And I don't know how many secondaries around the NFL can say that. And when that's very important to say, exactly to your point, Booner, when you're going up against those elite quarterbacks, and then you got to go up against a defensive line that getting to the passer hasn't been their strength. Stopping the run, they're elite at, but getting to the passer, when you're going up against elite quarterbacks, haven't been consistent at it, you better have a good fucking secondary. And Brad Holmes has made sure that corner spot has not been a weakness for this defense over the last 2 off seasons. You look at trading for Carlton Davis, bringing Amik Robertson last year, doubling down in the draft with Ennis and Terrion. And then this year, you're pretty much keeping the gang together. Carlton leaves, and right away, almost it seems like DJ Reed's coming into town on a cheaper deal. So Brad's not messing around with that cornerback room, and you don't even have to touch that safety room. So I think the floor for the secondary specifically is top 10. I think if it falls outside the top 10, there can be some issues, but I don't see that happening this year. I think it's going to be a very good secondary.
Yeah, I think the biggest, a big kind of X factor, I think has to be Ennis Rakestraw, right? I mean, you drafted him last year. He was hurt. Obviously, the Lions, I mean, Brad, coming from Brad's mouth, right? He said it. He literally said Ennis Rakestraw was one of the highest rated corners on his board. So this year, I mean, I expect to see more of Ennis, especially if they put more DBs on the field. You might have Ennis out there in some packages where he's big, long, like they could use him. Maybe the whole thing in college we were bringing up, it's like, well, you know, a little iffy sometimes in coverage, and that was what Scott and some of the guys who brought on, some scouts, were talking about. But that's not something. I mean, you expect him to get better, right, in year 2. With a year under his belt, and now another offseason. I know the draft offseason is a little rush, but a whole offseason now, healthy. And now you got Amik, and people are talking about it in the chat, like his ability to play outside. They have not only a lot of good guys personnel wise, but they have guys that have versatility, which I think's important, right? Like Amik can play outside, play at nickel. Maybe Ennis has a little nickel in him. He can play outside. Obviously, that's where he played. And then Brian. If Brian plays in the nickel full time, he's one of the best nickels in the league. There's not even a question. So that's the thing you have to think about too. It's like, man, we want to put Brian at safety so he can make more plays, but it's like you also want to put one of your best playmakers near the football. You know what I mean? Like the guy makes plays in the run game. He just makes a great tackler, tackle for losses. He's everywhere. So it's going to be interesting to see how Calvin Shepard it's like chess pieces, you know, how he's moving these guys around. Because I think they got some talent in there. DJ Reed, I'm not worried about. But Terrion Arnold, not only for him, huge year for development, but Ennis Rakestraw. I think he should be held into that same standard kind of. Like, what does he look like next season?
I think Ennis too, honestly, if he's healthy. We had these conversations when they drafted Ennis. I remember the months leading up to it. I think it was Scott that brought up to us about Ennis. He wasn't the biggest fan of him. The only reason was when we watched his game film, when he was healthy, he was really good at Missouri. One of the best corners out of the draft class. And that was literally, he was a projected first round pick, Only reason Ennis doesn't go first round is because he's just constantly hurt. And like year one, guess what? Hurt. So if he stays healthy in year two and he's in this organization for another year, like I would think Ennis takes that step to where, hey, you're able to rely on him. And instead of Kindle Vildor, guess who you have? You have Ennis Rakestraw. And he ends up being that kind of that, let's say, what would you call it as a quarter, like fourth, fifth man. Like he's that guy that's going to be able to rotate in for either even with the Meek at nickel, or because remember last year who was at nickel in training camp, boys? Ennis Rakestraw,
and Emmanuel Mosley.
Yeah, so like they were all battling for that position. So like you could put Ennis in nickel, you could put him outside, and you're able to kind of move guys around. I am interested, Jeff. I think that's a good point. Like Brian Branch, like he's 100 times better at nickel, and then obviously when you get out of that formation, obviously he's going to probably go back to safety. But like that was why Iffy was so good down the stretch, was they were able to move Brian Branch to nickel and move things around a little bit when Carlton went out. And you could tell that was when Brian was back to his best. So I don't know what they'll do with that. That's
and he's good at, like, he's just a good football player. He's good at nickel. He's good at safety. He just played deep safety because he's making plays. I mean, the Vikings game, he was playing safety and he had the interception against Sam Darnold. Like the guy is like, I don't even know. Like when he's so good at so many things, it's like,
I just think it's hard for next year though. Like, say you throw him at nickel, right? And you need another safety. Like you don't really have another safety right now. Like I've done a couple mock drafts and Klotz, the kid out of Ransom out of Ohio State, like a guy like that who can come in, I think potential start in the NFL right away. Like you have to just find a guy like that, maybe in the draft, second, third round. And maybe that's something that Brad's looking at because he let Iffy walk and he hasn't signed another free agent. A safety free agent. So you're sitting there and you're like, okay, he hasn't signed an extra corner or an extra safety.
Right.
So you lose Kendall Vildor and you don't bring in another corner, and then you lose Iffy and there's not another safety. So you lost two secondary guys, right? So in my mind, that maybe just leads like, hey, Brad's looking in the draft. He likes a couple of guys in this draft class at that position. Or he thinks Ennis is ready to go, which that kind of pumps me up a little bit about. Like if Ennis Rakestraw is healthy for a whole year, I think the man has talent. Klotz, you should do a film breakdown on Ennis Rakestraw, like healthy Ennis Rakestraw in college. Show
That's
the people.
like he will thrive the best in the nickel because I understand that the Lions have a theme right now of undersized corners on the outside that are physical. But I think if you're looking at Ennis, like Amik's very good right now. Like I'm not saying, ship Amik, but at the end of the day, Amik's got 2 more years, including this season on his contract. And we've seen how Brad Holmes has been with guys outside of the organization that are brought in. And I wouldn't be surprised at all by the time that Amik's contract comes up, we see Ennis Rakestraw kind of slotting right there into that nickel spot because that lets Brian Branch just play his best ball. Kirby Joseph play his best ball. Both of those guys are staying in position. And Ennis Rakestraw, he has everything it takes to be a good defensive back in the league. That's why he was a second-round pick, and some viewed him as a first-round pick. So talent's not the issue. Some people say size is, but Brad Holmes, Kelvin Shepard, Dan Campbell, they don't think so. Like, healthy Ennis Rakestraw at Missouri, he wasn't locking people down necessarily, but he was a tone setter, and that's what this defense is all about. Guys who fly around the field, can make plays and deliver hits, because that creates forced fumbles. If you got Kirby Joseph and Brian Branch intercepting balls in the secondary, and obviously you're going to have Terrion, DJ Reed doing it, you need somebody that's a little fucking crazy out there, setting a tone, saying, hey, I understand you're going to catch a pass. You don't want to make them think twice about catching a pass in the middle of the field, going down the sideline. That's what guys like Amik Robertson and Ennis Rakestraw can do. So I know it was a disappointing first year as far as you didn't see him on the field, but it's kind of the optimistic side of it as well. Like we don't know what Ennis Rakestraw could be. He could be very, very fucking good, and we just haven't seen it yet. Or he could be like, okay, he needs to develop a little bit more, but I don't think Ennis Rakestraw is going to be one of those guys that just never finds a spot in the NFL with this team. I don't think he's going to be one of those cases.
He might be. Hey, what year did Iffy? We were like, oh, wow, that kid's actually really good. That was like year 3, wasn't it? Yeah. Like, because his injuries. It could be something with Ennis. I know people are like, oh, I don't want to deal with that. But like, it might not even be year 3 for him. It might be just this year. He might have just been going through something this year, and now he's like, all right, this next year, here we go.
Hey, what's going on there? It's Jeff Iafrate. Appreciate you for finishing the video. You can check out one of the videos here suggested or show support by commenting, liking, and subscribing. And buy your merchandise, officialctsports.com.